All right. Well, welcome to Larry Brock's Facebook page. And what better guest on Larry Brock's Facebook page than our MP, Larry Brock. Larry, good to see you.
Great to see you, Dave. Happy to be here.
Yeah, this is the first in a series of these type of Q&As that we want to be able to do as a part of being a public servant. So let's just start off there. And today we're going to talk about crime. We've got a bunch of questions that people have asked either on the Facebook page or via email, and that's going to be today's focus. And we're going to take a look a bit at that. But first, how is being an MP? Like, how's it going?
Busy days, although not in Ottawa. Very, very active with my Conservative caucus colleagues. I'm participating in a number of, we call them little mini caucus advisory committees. A lot of these advisory committees are issues that I feel are pertinent to our community here in Brantford-Brant. I sit on the mental health committee, addictions committee, justice committees, poverty issues, housing issues, all of which I'm learning from my colleagues across the country, looking at best methods, best ways to tackle some of these issues, to be the leader within the government itself, to advocate very strongly to affect the change that we all desperately need. So really, really enjoying it. Busy days, long nights. It is important that I remember it's the good citizens of Brantford-Brant that put me in this very honorable position. When you're in Ottawa, sometimes, you often forget there are no votes in Ottawa. You got to remember your constituents in Brantford. But what I do is I like to vocalize and be the leader for Brantford-Brant in the House. I look for speaking opportunities when I can. As I think I've indicated to you during one of our last conversations, completely honored and thrilled to be chosen by our leader, Aaron O'Toole, to lead the shadow caucus, or sort of the shadow ministry in terms of the Justice and the Attorney General files. And the last few weeks of Parliament before we broke for the winter break, some pretty big issues, one of which we'll be talking about today, which is Bill C-5.
Yeah. Now, obviously, in your work as a Crown attorney for a lot of years here in town, crime is something that is not unfamiliar territory for you. And so, as we get into the specific questions from people, why have you devoted so much of your professional life to crime?
Well, as you know, Dave, and perhaps maybe some members of the community who are watching this may not realize, is I've taken it upon myself to develop a niche experience in terms of my legal career in the criminal law area. It's something that has fascinated me. I think we had this discussion about my origins of why I wanted to be a lawyer and my fascination with Perry Mason at the age of 5. So after my call to the bar in Ontario here in 1992, I was, amongst other things that I did with my legal career, I focused in on criminal justice issues, and I was a defense counsel. Being an advocate for individuals charged with a myriad of criminal offenses. And I enjoyed that literally until 2004, when I made that decision to switch gears, to close up my personal practice, and to join the Ministry of the Attorney General as a Crown attorney. So pretty much through the entire 30-year career, Dave, as a member of the Ontario Bar, I've had a real keen interest and a passion for criminal justice issues, again, both as a defender and most recently as a prosecutor. I've taken that passion and that interest, again, privileged by my leader to recognize the extensive experience that I have, and to parlay that now as a critic as a member of Parliament in the House of Commons.
So let's get into some of the specifics that people have either made comments about on Facebook or sent us an email. Some things sort of some comments sort of slush into the same topic. So let's just I'll just share. This is Sheila writes, homelessness, drug addiction, mental illness, they all contribute to crime. We've been struggling to keep ourselves safe during the pandemic as it continues with lockdowns, etc., higher cost of food, utilities, taxes, and it's causing a lot of ills in our city. Sean wrote, I don't see crime as a priority right now. In fact, I see crime as an emergent side effect of bigger problems. Let's start broad stroke. What are some of the other contributing factors to crime in a city?
Well, when you look at, as a lawyer, the lens by which I did look at crime, particularly as a prosecutor, is not only are you there trying to hold the offender accountable, but you're also trying to affect some degree of change. And there are a number of sentencing principles within the criminal code, some of which, depending on the nature of the crime, take more precedence than others. But nevertheless, one overreaching priority in the criminal code for any justice who sentences anyone from shoplifting all the way to a homicide is the concept of rehabilitation. So yes, there is a degree, I understand some of those questions that people put to us. Why does crime matter, and why do I take the passion that I do and the interest that I do? Is because I'm a firm believer that a person's criminal past and their criminogenic factors don't necessarily define that person as a human being. That there is some redeeming quality to an individual, regardless of their background. And quite often, you don't wake up after serving 30 years or 40 years, depending on the age of the offender, going through life being a productive member of society and decide, no, today is the day I want to rob a bank with a loaded weapon. There's usually a series of circumstances that have caused an individual to make that unfortunate decision to engage themselves in the criminal justice system. So yes, we do look at criminogenic factors. We take a look at a lack of education. We take a look at the collapse of the family network, lack of role models in a person's rearing, lack of opportunities when someone is a youth to engage and to involve themselves into sports and to clubs, things like that. Take a look at substance abuse issues, mental health issues, homeless issues, residency issues. These are all factors that quite often are so interconnected that it leads one to that inescapable conclusion that there is no hope for them, and they're going to have to engage in some criminal activity, either to sustain an addiction, to acquire the necessary funds to live, to find a place to live. Quite often, it's a disturbing comment that I'm about to make, but quite often, we usually saw an uptick in random criminal behavior with a whole goal of removing someone off the streets, getting them into a nice institution where it's warm, they're going to get their 3 meals a day, and they would commit a crime such that they would be in during the beginning of the winter season and hopefully be out by the end of the winter season. So you don't look at the criminal justice system as your social network to try to create some background or some safety net, but quite often a lot of people feel there is no hope for them. And that's why I take a look at these issues in a big constellation, because it's not a one size fits all type of approach. And we, as a conservative caucus, as early as I can remember following conservative policies, have looked at innovative ways to deal with the criminal justice problems that we're all facing. This pandemic, and I don't need to remind what this pandemic has done to communities across this country, but particularly in Brantford-Brant, the pandemic, in my view, has really exposed the frailties that have existed for a long period of time leading up to the pandemic. The issue regarding our lack of medical resources, an outdated hospital that needs to be refreshed in some fashion, or a brand new hospital, more support services dealing with homeless issues, more support services for addictions, more support services for mental health. The pandemic has really put a spotlight on the problems that we here in Brantford-Brant need to tackle. So I forget the person's name who addressed the question and put it out there. Why is crime the priority? Crime reduction the priority? Everything, in my view, is a priority. And I've got some ideas that I would like to share based on the platform that we advanced to Canada during the past election that I think could have a real important factor in reducing the overall criminal factor in our community and across this country.
Couple of comments from Jay and Josh, sort of along this line, but I'll get to a question on it. But Jay says, what about landlords rent gouging, sick food prices, homeless on the streets, and a lot more coming, fixing the court system, such as drugs and unlicensed gun owners and more crime time, as he says, Josh says. And this is an interesting question. He's saying it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, I believe, saying, I can assume the solutions will exclusively focus on mitigating the symptoms of crime rather than addressing the root causes. And I can hear the tongue-in-cheek in it, but maybe speak to, when you are addressing crime in a community, how do you go, where's the pendulum on dealing with the symptoms and then dealing with root causes?
Well, I think the pendulum should be, in my view, smack dab in the middle, because we have to look at root causes. We can't prioritize root causes over dealing with the symptoms. I think both issues need to be looked at the same time. And I think any responsible political party that is governing, whether it's the federal government, the provincial government, the municipal government, have to take a look at these issues. And I think it's come a point in time where we just can't, as politicians, simply slough it off and say, oh, you know, that's a municipal issue, or that's a provincial issue, or that's exclusively the domain of the federal government. We need to collaboratively work together. All levels of government need to collaboratively work together to address the root causes and to address the symptoms. So that is my overall approach to how I want to be an effective member of parliament for this community. With my background, I'm not just, and I know that a number of people have actually opined in some of the questions that, oh, well, we expect Mr. Brock just to talk about locking people up or just addressing the soft on crime liberal agenda. And while that is an aspect, I think you have to look at the total reality of the situation. And that's why I said at the outset, everything that you have addressed, Dave, in this question you just put to me, in my view, is all interconnected. So if you want me to get into the weeds, and I'm happy to get into the weeds as to what I would like to advocate as a member of parliament, bearing in mind the conservative policies that we have with respect to those issues, because we do have a position that we are articulating literally daily in the House. I don't know if anyone on this particular Facebook video has taken the time to watch the occasional question period that happens every single day on CPAC or online. Please take a look at what we and my colleagues are doing. We are holding the government accountable to not only look at inflationary issues, but to take a look at mental health issues. And just on the mental health issue alone, Dave, I'd like to really dive into this because coincidentally, just prior to me engaging in this video, we had a caucus advisory committee on the mental health issue. And I was informed about some pretty startling statistics that I want to share with you. That the pandemic, as indicated, has really increased the mental health crisis that we have here in our community, but particularly with our youth. The youth who have been subjected to lockdowns and to separation from friends and family, to the elimination of the after-school programs or some of their extracurricular activities. My kids alone have suffered by not being able to participate in their competitive swim group sessions at the Wayne Gretzky Sports Center. But it has increased to the point where we're seeing a number of suicides daily. We're seeing a substantial increase in attempts daily. The government, late December of 2000, through unanimous consent, passed a law that would provide for a 3-digit suicide hotline known as 988. We were all excited, at least I wasn't part of the government back then or part of the Conservative Caucus, but all parliamentarians were excited that we would provide a very easy number for anyone facing that very difficult decision to continue or to end one's life because of one particular crisis or another, to make sure that they had the supports available. Unfortunately, even with unanimous consent in the Parliament, right now it's being held up by some administrative red tape at the CRTC. So it's been 402 days since the government unanimously passed that particular law to allow for this hotline. We have not seen it to fruition, and every single day we are losing individuals to suicide. So one thing I did find out is that there was an initiative taken by a father whose son committed suicide in this country during the pandemic. He created a website, and it's called bethere.org. BETHERE, one word, .org. It is a fantastic Canadian success story. It has a simple interface, and it's meant for young people to take a look at that, to learn more about the supports that are actually available to them, and to share that resource with their colleagues, with their friends who might also be suffering. So I would encourage any adult who is watching this Facebook message, who has children who are suffering, to take a look at that particular website. And hopefully that provides a good resource, because as we all know, Dave, 1 in 5 individuals in this country will suffer from a mental health experience. And we are really, without tooting the horn too loudly about the Conservative movement in our caucus, but our leader, Erin O'Toole, has been championing mental health issues since day one of our election campaign and continues to do so as leader of its loyal opposition. We have decided that we should make mental health, destigmatize the issue of mental health, and make it a health issue, to provide the necessary funding to the provinces that can be funneled down to municipalities to ensure that there is adequate funding to increase the level of service in the communities to provide this much needed resource. So I'm very glad that I had the opportunity to engage in a discussion with my colleagues, as I knew that this would be a topic of conversation during this video. So thank you.
Let me throw out a few comments that people submitted. From someone who emailed, wants to be anonymous, says, we all know the system is broken because of one and only thing, and that's mental health. Well, whatever we're doing it wrong. This person writes, the subject is something I'm so close to, as I had a petition before the pandemic at a store in the mall that supported mental health. The petition had over 1,000 signatures on it, and we never did submit it, as we wanted signatures from all over Canada. And when the pandemic started, it was the end of getting signatures. Anyway, it was a petition to implement mandatory self-esteem programs and mental health education in our schools. That was the one comment. Another comment from another emailer who is also wanting to remain anonymous. The monumental degree of poverty in Brantford and the ease of the social welfare for recipients suffering from mental health and addictions is putting a burden on the city. There are not enough social resources to reduce the crime elements we're faced with in the community. Crime is increasing. Evidence can be seen in a sentence handed down to an out-of-towner where the judge admonished the individual for importing his criminality into Brantford. Maybe give a bit of a comment on that. That's an interesting point and comment that this gentleman makes about crime coming from outside of our community coming into our community. Jump off anything of those two issues.
Yeah, I have seen that trend. That comment only solidifies what I have seen as a legal professional for well over a decade. As you well know, over the last, I'm going to say the last 10 years, maybe closer to the last 8 years, we have seen a significant uptick in criminal activity in this jurisdiction, in this riding. But when I say criminal activity, I'm talking about really serious criminal activity. We have seen a surge in homicides, the likes of which I don't believe this city has ever seen in its history as a city. I believe I read one statistic not too long ago that talked about at one point we had 12 homicides that we were prosecuting and or investigating. And there's still a number of cold cases. We talk about homicides. Not every homicide, as you well know, leads to a charge, leads to a trial, leads to a conviction, or whatever other disposition might be available to that person. There are a number of cold cases, but we have seen that huge increase. And in my view, we as professionals have looked at it to say, what is it about Brantford? Why are we being centered out? Why are we suffering now with a lack of police resources to adequately deal with this surge in serious criminal activity? Well, David, the simple answer is I saw this trend happening well over 10 years ago. And I saw what was happening because quite often the serious criminal activity that we see in this community is linked to two issues. And those two issues is gun crime and it's drugs. And you take a look at the gang-related activity in Metro Toronto and the Greater Toronto, Hamilton area, you take a look at the number of gang activity. And to some people, they look at and they hear on the news or they read about it that it's one gang banger trying to protect their turf and trying to shoot at another gang banger who's trying to violate that turf. Well, quite often that usually is the case. They don't often necessarily just target law-abiding individuals, but there is some danger in that type of activity. And that danger is anytime that they discharge a weapon in public, innocent bystanders could be the byproduct of a misfire or a deflection of the bullet. And that's what is really concerning to me as a professional, is that increase in gang activity. So what I saw was these gangs have realized, you know what? Why do we have to risk our lives to try to maintain a little piece of turf in this large conglomerate of a city that we're involved in? Let's branch out. There's always going to be a need to service the public in terms of servicing their drug addictions. And they recognize that, you know what, there is less activity, less gang activity in areas in southwestern Ontario. And we see this migration of significant criminal gang activity away from the larger centers to smaller centers. So is it any surprise that over the last 10 years, we see an uptick in gun activity? There wasn't a day that didn't go by as a Crown prosecutor when I took a look at a brief or got ready for bail court, taking a look at robberies or taking a look at random spot checks where guns happen to be found in plain view or drugs found to be in plain view with not necessarily quantities for personal consumption, but in plain view scales and baggies and deadlifts. When you combine drugs and you combine guns, it creates a very, very toxic environment. And quite often when I looked at that as a prosecutor, You know what, Dave? Not one of those individuals born and raised in this community, largely Toronto, Brampton, Mississauga, looking at ways to ply their illegal trade activity without that necessary competition, endangering our community. It caught the attention of prosecutors, it got the attention of lawyers, it got the attention of police officers, and now, to your point, it's getting the attention of judicial officers who are sick and tired of adjudicating over matters that are not homegrown. These are individuals, and I think the reference that you just referenced is from a news article that the Expositor printed about a week ago. And I happened to be part of that particular prosecution at one point in my previous career. And it's concerning that a lot of the significant criminal activity is being perpetrated by the out-of-towners.
We're gonna go to the C5 at the very end of today, because I know that it's very important and present to you. But I want to get a few other questions and comments surrounding drugs, because this is where we're sitting right now. I want to share a few. Brad says, let's start close to home, shall we? Here in Brantford, much like other municipalities, drugs and crime that follow are running rampant. Perhaps rather than encouraging safe injection sites and little slaps on the wrist, breaking the law, why don't we address the actual issues and get drugs off our streets, out of the hands of our youth? Eric references, we have lots of drugs, and we have cannabis dispensaries, check cashing businesses, lots of them. Norm writes, and this is a very, love to be able to hear your thoughts on this, says, would Canada and especially Ontario benefit from a 3-strike rule for drug-related crime, including tiered penalties for being caught under the Controlled Substances and Drug Act? Would this deter potential or would-be dealers into thinking twice about making a quick buck? Obviously, this is super nuanced issues, but interesting to hear the thoughts of people and where they're at on a guttural level. Curious your thoughts.
Specifically to address the drug issue or the sentencing provisions that relate to drug-related crime?
Well, let's talk about the sentencing that was thrown out there.
The 3-strike rule? Is that what you're referencing? Okay.
Yeah.
So that style of judicial decision-making will never have an appetite in this country. That is a provision that quite often is utilized in a number of states in America. We vastly different here in Canada. We are vastly different in terms of how we roll out our criminal justice. I alluded to earlier about some of the sentencing factors. So what we can do, and I really appreciate the concern that this person has, in the sense that a lot of people in the community have, that crimes are just not being treated with the same type of seriousness by our judges that the public would like to see. Why are some members of the community who are sentenced to serious criminal activity, why are they allowed to return home and serve out a sentence in their own community or in their own home, known as a conditional sentence? That's frustrating for a lot of people. And it was very hard for me as a professional to really satisfy them with a legal explanation as to what the rationale really was behind that. So what I can say to the individual about the 3-strike rule is what we can do as a opposition, what we can do as a government, is to ensure that there are meaningful consequences for criminal activity. And one way of allowing for meaningful consequences is to ensure that there are mandatory minimums. And that's going to be a more lengthier conversation when we take a look at Bill C5, because we as a conservative party differ substantially philosophically from the current Liberal government when it comes to mandatory minimums. But to address the author of that particular question, that is one way of ensuring that we could look at amendments to the criminal code that, depending on the serious nature of your drug conviction, any prior drug convictions of a similar nature could result in an even stronger mandatory minimum. You take a look at those criminogenic factors, you take a look at the sentencing principles. I mentioned rehabilitation. That's only one sentencing principle. There's other principles known as denunciation. There's principles known as removing the offender from society. There's principles known as both general and specific deterrence, deterring that individual to not commit that crime again, and to educate the public that should you want to go down this road and commit this particular offense, knowing that this person had these type of factors, that this person had this either criminal record or lack of a criminal record, you might expect this type of sentence should you find yourself in conflict with the law. So that there are already ways that our judges in Canada deal with long-term offenders who continually put society at risk by their criminal activities. What I can say as a member of parliament and a member of the opposition to address that question, we can do much more. We can advocate much more for amendments to the criminal code.
Let's talk about opioids. Maryland route. It's my opinion that a great deal of crime in our province is due to use of drugs, especially opioids. It's time for the government to spend more money on drug prevention and rehabilitation than they do on safe injection sites. I believe that the safe injection sites give addicts a false sense of security. Your reactions to that, and the opioid crisis that, you know, we were dealing with this as a city, and then the pandemic hit, but it has certainly not gone away.
Yes, wholeheartedly agree, not only as a politician, as a former Crown prosecutor, as a member of this fine community. We have seen the devastating impacts that the opiate crisis has created. Again, the pandemic has really heightened the overall impact that this crisis has had. We are losing our youth. We are losing adults daily. When you're looking at not necessarily just the opiate itself, you're looking at the dangers of some of the drugs that are being mixed with the opiate that the person is thinking that they're buying. Numerous examples, Dave, of people thinking they're buying soft cocaine. Little do they know it's mixed with fentanyl. You know the dangers of fentanyl, that one little grain of fentanyl, the size of a grain of salt, can be enough, depending on the person's biology, can be enough to quickly end their life. So we are seeing daily deaths, we are seeing overdoses, and that person's point is well taken. Yes, there needs to be a fine balance, but where is that balance? Is it supposed to be an equal balance between safe injection and then a focus on rehabilitation? I take the view, and the view of our Conservative caucus, and this was the view that we took during the last election, is we want to ensure that we take this as a priority and we look at recovery as an overriding principle of the Canadian health plan when it comes to drug usage in this country. To not only offer a safe haven, there has to be a mechanism to give the person the opportunity to perhaps use safe syringes, to lessen the blight of the used syringes that we see in city parks, to lessen the blight of people openly injecting themselves in community centers. The downtown core is a classic example. I think there was one judge who opined that he looked out his window and saw someone injecting themselves or someone suffering from a collapse of a drug overdose. So safe injection sites, if used wisely, if made known to those addicts out there who feel that there is no opportunity other to do it in plain view, to give them that opportunity gives them the chance to do it safely, remove them from the streets, but also to ensure that we're not just saying that this is the answer for you long term, is to ensure that we look at recovery, we look at rehabilitation. And to the other person's comments, we need to inject that money now, not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now, not wait to table it in the next Liberal budget, whenever that may come down the pipes. Every political leader in the last election, Dave, was talking about the opiate crisis. We, unfortunately, are the only ones that are constantly reminding the Liberal government we have to make this a priority as a government to ensure the safety of the addict, the safety of our community. We have to ensure that those funds are available, the resources are funneled through to the municipality so that they can react appropriately.
If you're just tuning in and just seeing this now, we're talking with MP Larry Brock about a number of issues regarding crime and all the different things that surround it. We're going to chat as we close at the end about C5, Bill C5. I'm going to talk about the role of police in a minute. But this is an interesting question from Karen when it comes to drugs and in the different ways that different drugs affect our neighborhoods, I guess, and our lives. Karen says, Larry, I'm curious why a cannabis plant in our neighborhood, which spews noxious odors in the area, was not shut down when it was found by Brantford police to have a significant amount of plants in a contravention of the amount they were allowed to grow, and references an Expositor article. Why do they get a second chance when it appears that it was intentional on the part of owner operator? Don't know the case, don't know whether you can comment on it or not, but
I can. Excellent question to the author of that. I think a little bit of a background refresher is probably wise before I answer the actual question itself. So 6 years ago, as we all know, the government introduced legislation to legalize the consumption of marijuana, and in certain circumstances, the production and distribution of marijuana. It created a two-stream system. We have two streams, one of which is the commercial industrial growers that we have all across this country, who are licensed, who are heavily regulated, who are subjected to annual inspections and provide marijuana, okay, to sell to individuals across this country. We don't have a problem with that. Some may say it's created a problem in terms of the number of available cannabis shops in this city. I don't think it takes anyone with any great knowledge. You just drive in any part of this city and they're just springing up left and right. So we have an abundance of availability in this community, which is not really the issue that pertains to this question. The other stream is the problem. The other stream is the medical marijuana producers, where it allows individuals who are consumers to actually grow for themselves, and in certain circumstances, having someone grow for them. And it's that second aspect that's creating the problem identified in this particular question. That particular area is in Brantford, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the second tier of these growers are not as extensively regulated and controlled as are the other licensed commercial industrial growers. And because of that, there is a legal loophole that is creating a number of problems. These problems exist not only in Brantford-Brant, they particularly exist, a real problem in Haldimand, Norfolk, and in many small rural communities across this country, so much so that we as a Conservative caucus have created our own caucus advisory committee on marijuana and closing this legal loophole, because it allows individuals under the so-called regime of growing on behalf of somebody to not only grow what that person is legally authorized to smoke in a given year, but they are increasing the production. And that increase in production has a direct link to organized crime. It is feeding the black market. And when you're feeding the black market, you're getting involved now with guns and you're getting into turf wars and you're exposing the public at risk. That's one issue. Second issue is there is significant, because it's unregulated, licensed but unregulated, there isn't the necessary efforts to control the smell. The smell is so bad that it is causing people to sell their homes at reduced property values. It's devaluing the value. It's causing people to not being able to enjoy a night out in their community, a nice walk around the block. The smell is so bad. In fact, I read one case where it got into the clothing of one of the kids in someone's home. The kid went to school the next day. The teacher reported the family to the Children's Aid Society, thinking that the family was exposing the child to an unnecessary risk. So no control over odor. The police are sort of hamstruck in their ability as to what the appropriate charge can be and to how to lay it. And to address that particular question head on is that particular operation resulted in a police raid. The police were only able to remove the excess amount over which they were legally entitled to grow, destroy it. They brought that to the attention of Health Canada, and Health Canada has been set up with a regime that should there be a complaint of an independent grower breaching the parameters of the Marijuana Act, that license would be revoked. That happened 3 years ago, Dave, and all we're hearing now is crickets from Health Canada. So becoming a member of Parliament, probably the first couple of days, I started to hear from city leaders, county leaders about these problems. I met with Councillor Antosky most recently. I've consulted with other MPs, so much so that I'm now taking the lead in terms of presenting to our national caucus at the end of January of this year to ensure that we as a conservative opposition, a conservative party, bring this to the immediate attention of the government. The legislation was set up that there was supposed to be a legislative review within 3 years. Those 3 years would have expired in October of 2021. Now, I'm prepared to give the government some slack. Clearly, the pandemic has created that as a priority. We all know that. And we also had the most recent election. But the mechanism is there. We need to advocate very strongly that this is a problem in my particular riding and across several other ridings to ensure that this legal loophole is closed to give peace, to give the police the powers that they need to bring back property values and to ensure that the public is protected from this nuisance.
Well, so when I asked, is that something you're able to speak to? The answer is
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've already started that process.
Wow, fantastic. Okay, let's talk. This comes from Angela about the role of police when it comes to crime. She says, many well-respected criminologists have stated, however, that police forces and harsher penalties alone cannot do and reduce crime rates, aside from the fact that acts and legislation are involved, which makes it much more complicated and lengthy. Promising evidence, however, also suggests that if municipalities and police forces work together to change their approach to crime control and prevention, it can be done. And then adds, hopefully we can all walk down the street late one night without having to look over your shoulder.
Well, to that point, I cannot disagree. I already have taken part in numerous meetings with city officials. We have a task force that deals with crime in this particular community, for which I sit on, as does the chief of police, Brantford Police Services. There are innovative ways that we're looking at addressing these issues. So I just want people to realize that we have recognized this issue. I think policing is done best if the community gets on board. I don't think we are ever going to get to the situation where we have this defund police movement that you see and read about constantly in the American press. I think there still exists some degree of respect for law enforcement in this country. But what we can do and what we have done as a conservative caucus is to ensure that we're looking at some of the root causes of gun crime, for instance, Dave. Okay, your typical homicide, your typical random shooting, your typical firearm possession charge or stopping in the community on a spot check. You're not seeing the firearms. You're not seeing those people who have lawfully taken the courses, who are lawfully licensed. You're not looking at long arms. People don't decide to rob a variety store with a long arm. They have to conceal it. And how they're going to conceal it is they're going to conceal it by having a handgun. And the vast majority, a high percentage of all handgun crimes committed in this country are committed by illegal handguns that are being funneled across our borders, over our land borders. Some of the shipping containers that are coming in on our coast are just full of illegal firearms. So we have, as a conservative opposition, we have decided that we have to invest into law prevention. We have to, in crime prevention, we have to invest into strengthening our borders, working with the RCMP, working with the Canadian Border Service agents, liaising with the intelligence on the American side to ensure that there's adequate funding and resources to stop that flow. Because once we can control that flow, there's not going to be a means. Now, the Liberal government will talk about, again, other ways that these criminals will access the guns, but studies have shown that the vast majority of guns that are used in this country illegally are coming from our borders.
Let's talk about Bill C5. This comes from Michael. It says, Larry, I watched your speech on Bill C5. How is that possible to eliminate minimum sentencing for drug dealers and for offenses that involve guns when crime stats are this bad?
Yes. Well, he hit the nail on the head, because I can tell you, as the Shadow Minister for Justice and the Attorney General, as the Deputy Shadow Minister working with the Minister, Rob Moore, I can inform you that we as a Conservative caucus are opposed on so many levels to Bill C5. Bill C5 has been touted so far by the Liberal government as a means to provide equity to the marginalized individuals in our community, particularly the Indigenous offenders and the Black offenders, who are traditionally and have been to this day, have represented a large majority of the incarcerated individuals in our Canadian prisons. This is a statistic that I have known for a significant period of time. It's a problem that has existed long before Bill C5 was tabled. The population of not only the adult male population in prisons, but also the female adult population in prisons is largely occupied by Indigenous individuals. As you know, the Indigenous population represents probably less than 5% of the total population, yet well over 20% of both male and female Indigenous offenders represent our prisons. So we are taking, I should say my past life, the Ministry of the Attorney General has taken some steps to address that. And one of the steps that we have taken on a local stage is through the Indigenous Peoples Court, is to ensure that we don't look at incarceration as our default option when you're dealing with Indigenous offenders, that you want to talk, and this talks about some of the other responses I've given you, Dave, talks about looking at the offender in a holistic way to take a look at some of the criminogenic factors. And a lot of the other criminogenic factors that we talk about is the significant impact that the residential school system has had on many of the Indigenous offenders that I have dealt with. Everything can be linked back to the lack of appropriate guidance and care that they had in their family, their mothers, their fathers, their grandparents being subjected to the abuses in that system. It's no wonder these individuals did not have the appropriate tools, did not have the proper love and guidance and direction. So we're looking at ways to be very creative, to help them learn as to why they got there, and some of the ways and some of the challenges that we can put forth to ensure that education is going to be a priority for them, or drug rehabilitation is going to be a priority for them. Looking at ways to show that there is a different path, changing that trajectory. Okay, I talk about changing trajectory for youth. There's also changing trajectory for adults. Again, your particular conviction does not define who you are. And that was a message I tried to relay daily when I sat in Indigenous Peoples Court and prosecuted that. And I've seen some great, really, really great successes for individuals who felt they were simply a number, simply a name. In fact, I had one individual who actually thanked me, tears, cried, and thanked me for someone that I had prosecuted numerous times prior to the creation of the Indigenous Peoples Court, who thought that I thought nothing of them other than simply another statistic, another Indigenous offender who didn't care about their background, didn't care about their issues, didn't care about their future. And when I had a chance to actually sit down in Indigenous Peoples Court, learn more about the individual, challenge the individual to make some changes, giving him that runway to make those changes. He came back in a year's time, proving to me that he was committed to making a change. And he did avoid a brick and mortar jail sentence because of the commitment that he made to me and the opportunities that I saw as a prosecutor, that I felt confident enough that I was still discharging my responsibility appropriately without putting the community at risk. And that really is the essence of the Crown Prosecution Service, is to ensure that you're respecting the rights of the individual, you're taking a look at their factors, trying to make what's best out of their life, but also protecting the community.
One more question on this, and then I want to chat about a petition that you personally have going from. This is from Helen. Says the government is saying that C5 is going to help fight systemic racism in Canada's criminal justice system. What's your stand on this? Don't you think that's important?
Well, again, this allows me to finish off my train of thought, okay? Because I sort of deviated in terms of my experience in Indigenous Peoples Court. That quite often happens when you ask a lawyer. This is when you ask a lawyer to be brief, or when a judge says, "Mr. Brock, how long are you going to be in your submissions?" And I say maybe a half an hour. She starts to laugh because they know full well a lawyer cannot confine their comments to 30 minutes. So that's what the Liberal government wants you to believe. That this legislation, this tabled legislation, I should be very, very clear, this is not law yet. It has only gone through first reading. It is now at the committee stage, and the Committee on Justice only met once, which was the last sitting before our winter break. We're going to resume again sometime in February to study this in full, bring in witnesses, leading experts from across this country to really dive deep into this legislation. But that is the narrative that the public has probably heard so far, that this legislation will address bang on, head on, and reduce the number of incarcerated individuals who are either marginalized, that are Indigenous, or who are Black. The answer is no, because what the legislation does is it only removes 14 of the 67 current mandatory minimums in the criminal code. And of those 14 mandatory minimums, we're talking about the most significant, serious criminal offenses that involve gun possession, gun trafficking, use of a gun, use of a loaded gun, significant serious gun crimes. Bill C-5 is designed because their belief and their narrative is the judge needs to have the tools to be very, very creative, to take a look at the background of the offender, in this case, the Indigenous offender, to take a look at the background of the Black offender, to see whether or not they can deviate from that mandatory minimum. The fact of the matter is, Dave, individuals charged regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their sex, regardless of their color, individuals who commit these types of crimes don't do so on the spur of the moment. These are individuals largely who are hardened criminals who deserve and need to be removed from society. We as a conservative party feel very strongly about Bill C-5, so much so that we will challenge it every step of the way because it is not designed to eliminate those individuals or to prevent someone from going into jail. It just means that instead of the starting point being 4 years, maybe a judge will sentence that Indigenous offender to 3 years, or maybe that the person will sentence the offender to 2 years or 5 years. But again, that's not the narrative that you're hearing from the government. The government also talks about ensuring that we can allow more people to serve their sentences in the community, known as house arrest. But let's take a look at what the government is proposing in Bill C-5. Bill C-5 is designed to eliminate the class of offenses that once existed to preclude any consideration for conditional sentences, such as kidnapping, such as sexual assault, significant serious crimes, arson, for instance. A person who decides to burn down someone's castle, exposing that person who lives inside to harm, if not death. But a person who gets convicted of a residential arson, should they be rewarded with an opportunity of spending their sentence in their own home while that person has forever changed the life of the victim? We think not, as a conservative caucus. So the narrative you're hearing right now from the Liberal government does not translate into any periods of reduction of crime and will not eliminate, in our view, those individuals who will be serving a penitentiary sentence in any event. And if the government were really serious and they talk about mandatory minimums and they talk about studies and they talk about having had no impact on a person's rehabilitation or reduction in crime, if they were that serious about that, Dave, they would have eliminated all 67 mandatory minimums in the criminal code. They've only selected 14. And more troubling as well, under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, individuals charged with producing, trafficking fentanyl, importing fentanyl, those really significant crimes, may now have the privilege of serving that sentence, not in a federal penitentiary, but in the comfort of their own home. That's what this Liberal government is going to do with Bill C-5, or attempting to do with Bill C-5. We are against that.
We're wrapping up here. Obviously, there are more questions that have come in than we've been able to have time to be able to talk about, and we wanted to narrow today's discussion and Q&A down to a specific topic of crime and some of the different offshoots of that. So if you made a comment or sent an email and you didn't hear your specific question answered today, those are a couple of the reasons why you might, but we'll do this again in coming days. Tell us about your petition there.
Yes, so on the Bill C-5 issue, we have posted on my MP website, which is Larry Brock MP, all one word, .ca, my personal opposition and that of the Shadow Minister for Justice, Rob Moore, our opposition to the content of Bill C-5, and we want to engage the public by, if they feel as strongly as I do that this is the wrong direction that the Canadian government needs to make when it comes to this type of criminal activity, the significant gun crime, as I alluded to, the significant drug crime that I alluded to. If these individuals can go to my website, review the petition, I need a minimum of 25 signatures where I can then present that particular petition in open parliament, which will require a response from the Liberal government. Already I've taken the liberty of speaking in the House on a number of occasions on Bill C5. There'll be more opportunities for me to do so, but this is my opportunity to reach out to the good citizens of Brantford-Brant. If they feel as passionate as I do, please reach out to me. Please, let's have a discussion about these issues. And if you feel worthy enough and you want if you feel passionate enough, I should say, and you want to advance your particular cause, please sign the petition.
Well, we're out of time for today, Larry. This was good to be able to chat, and I know that your office is now open, and you have an incredible staff. And often people will actually get a hold of me when they've got some kind of problem. They're like, "Hey, Dave, what do I do?" And I'll point them towards these our different offices. City Hall has people to be able to help deal with issues. Our MPP has a staff and the ability to help deal with provincial issues, and you have a staff and a mandate to be able to help people with federal issues. So people shouldn't be afraid to get a hold of you, right? Like this is part of what this whole thing is about.
Absolutely not. We have a so-called open door policy under the rubric of the COVID regime. But yes, you can come into my office. You can reach out to me by telephone, reach out to me by email, reach out to me through social media. That proverbial door is always open. You're the reason why I have this honorable privilege to represent you in Brantford. I need to hear directly from you. So please reach out.